Welcome everyone to the June Meetup. Thanks for being here and thanks for being here virtually. Very excited. This is our second month in a row where we did both in-person and virtual. We're hoping to make a trend of that. We will have next month 3 months in a row, and that's a streak. So we're very excited about this, and we're going to hopefully have more and more in person after that. Just that it needs to be the confluence of speakers and venues. So by the way, if you have a venue or an office, you want to host us, let me know. Be in touch. We could definitely very much use that. First of all, I want to thank Microsoft for having us here today. They've hosted us a bunch in the past, hopefully again more in the future. Next month we'll be here. So big thank you to Microsoft. So what we always do, the first thing we do when we have the meetup is ask who's hiring. Is anyone, so if you're virtual and you're hiring, go to the meetup Slack and go to the jobs postings channel and post your job there. Is anyone in the room hiring? All right, so since you're in the room, you got to come up and announce it to everybody.
Hey, I'm Andrew Tim. I'm a manager of data science at 605. We're currently hiring like a mid-level data scientist role. We're an ad tech company. We also actually do some political work, if that's interesting to anyone. So very relevant to this talk. We work in the TV advertising space a lot. Yeah, if anyone in the room wants to talk, definitely hit me up after the talk. Happy to chat about it. Yeah, can post the listing in the Slack in a bit and talk to anyone who wants to talk about it.
Great, awesome. And folks, if you don't know the Slack, go to nyhackr.org, and at the top there's a little bouncing like hashtag icon. That's where you can find it. I am looking for part-time and full-time data scientists and Linux admins. So find me if you are looking for one of those types of roles, both part-time, full-time, remote, local. I guess local is still remote for me. And let me know. All right, next up. The pizza. Those of you who are virtual, where did you get pizza from? Let us know in the YouTube comments and we'll see and we'll reply to you. And hopefully it's pizza. If it's not pizza, you can let us know anyway. Those of you in the room, it came from Vito's Pizza over on 9th Avenue. So pull out your phones, go to bit.ly/pizzapoll, bit.ly/pizzapoll, lowercase, upper camel case goes somewhere different. It's like a magazine and nothing to do with pizza. But if you go to the lowercase one, and you can go rate the pizza on essentially a 1 to 5 scale, but it's qualitative, and that will go into our pizza poll live data visualization that's at nyhackr.org. So go in there, vote on the pizza, let us know how you thought about it. This data is very crucial for the scientific endeavor that we have here. All right, now I'll give everyone a moment to vote and rank on their pizza. Let us know how it is. Pros, cons, we'd like to know everything. Then we'll do just a few more announcements. Coming up, July, next month, is I think the 9th annual New York R Conference. We're very, very excited about this. We've been going for a very long time. This is our second year back in person post-pandemic, or whatever you call this time period in our lives. And we're very excited for this. We'll be giving out 2 free tickets after the Q&A, or before the Q&A maybe. After the talk, before the Q&A, I'm going to give out 1 to someone physically in the room and 1 to someone who's attending virtually. So we're going to give out 2 tickets to that. We're very excited for this. It's been a long time coming. The workshops are July 11th and 12th. And you're going to see workshops about machine learning of the tidyverse with Max Kuhn, tidy forecasting of Rob Heinemann, how to use Stan and Bayesian statistics with Jonah Gabry, and causal inference of Lucy D'Agostino McGowan and Malcolm Barrett. So that's always a popular day going to those workshops. And then the conference itself is July 13th and 14th. You're going to see a bunch of really great speakers like Bob Rudis. He's a new one to this conference this year. Caitlin Hooden, Max Kuhn, Asma Toomey, Rob Heinemann, all these great speakers, and Katerina Konstantinescu, who's actually here in attendance. So they'll be speaking. So thank you to all of our speakers. And in the past, we've done art auctions, like someone makes some sort of art, usually R-related or data-related. We're thinking about doing that again this year. So if anyone is an artist and wants to donate a piece of artwork for us to auction, we'll auction it off, and all the money is going to go to the R Foundation. And we're really excited to donate that money every year if we have artists. So if anyone's an artist and wants to donate, it could be like, actual paintings, or it could be, we had someone make little like coin purses and we auction that off. So anything that's fun, data science, R related, we'll auction off and donate the money. So let us know. If you'd like to attend, use code NYHackR for 20% off. So you get a 20% discount code just for being a member of this meetup, and you can go to rstats.ai/NYR to buy your tickets or learn more.
It's worth it just for the donuts.
Worth it for the donuts. Here's from a past attendee. Were you there for the ice cream sandwich year? We did ice cream sandwiches one time, but we got told they will melt because it's in July. There will be pizza, there will be egg and cheese sandwiches on Bialys and bagels, lots of good food, and there will be plenty of beverages to enjoy throughout the day. I mean all day, from 8 a.m. till the end. And we are doing a special live recording of the Super Data Science podcast. This is a really popular podcast hosted by John Crone. We're really excited about it, and this year he's going to be interviewing Chris Wiggins. Chris is one of the original members of the Meetup, coming to the Meetup for over a decade. He's spoken at the Meetup, he's spoken at the conference. He is the chief data scientist for the New York Times and a professor at Columbia. So he will be interviewed by John Crone on the Super Data Science podcast live at the conference. That is really exciting. I have a few more conferences to tell you about. There's a D4 conference in Tampa coming up in August 23rd through 25th. It's a general purpose data science conference about anything involving data, storytelling, design. It's a really fun event. I would tell you more, but I'm trying to hustle a little bit here. d4con.io, and if you want to attend, you're going to be in that area, or virtual, you could use code nyhackr for a 20% discount on that as well. And in one more conference, we have the R in Government Conference at Georgetown, October 18th through 20th. The first day is a workshop, the next 2 days are the conference. Official details will be announced soon. We're getting the speaker lineup finalized in the next few weeks. That is a conference about R and friends, mostly focused on government and public service, and that's federal, local, state, and there's international governments, there's NGOs. It's a really great time. You might have to give a talk there because it seems like it's in your realm. So it's a whole bunch of interesting topics. It's a specific theme, unlike the New York conference. All right, lastly, a few more things. Sorry, not lastly. Our next meetup will be July 6th. Back in this building, probably this room, all right? The speaker hasn't been announced quite yet. We're working on that. Hopefully in the next few days we'll have the speaker lined up and all finalized, but July 6th in this room or on that screen you're watching this on, or your other screen in your pocket, whatever screen you want to use. So July 6th, mark your calendars, really excited about that. We will be announcing it shortly. Our August speaker's in the room, but we don't have a venue yet. So as soon as we get a venue, we'll announce that. Yep, there's our August speaker. This is how it works, folks. You sit in the front row, you become a speaker. All right, if you have questions, if you're in the audience here, at the end we'll do questions. You raise your hand, I'll come by with a mic. If you are virtual, ask them either in the YouTube comments section or on our Slack at the monthly Meetup chat channel. You can find that at nyhackr.org and find the Slack there, or go in the YouTube comments, your choice. And lastly, for the people who are in the room, we will go to the bar afterwards. All right, I don't think I forgot any of our announcements. I think that was everything. So with that, this speaker, by the way, we found him because he came to the Meetup a few months ago, and he told me what he does. I'm like, you're going to give a talk at the Meetup. So folks, you want to give a talk, say hi. Say hi to me. Say you have an interesting topic. If you're virtual, and we will have virtual meetups again, purely virtual, so you can do it from far away, say hi. If you're going to be visiting New York, say hi, and we get speakers this way. It's a great way to do things. It's a really great way to find new people. So with that, please, everyone, welcome Soubhik.
Okay, so thanks so much, first of all, to Jared and Nicole for organizing this talk and for wrangling together this room. It's not easy in this city. Thanks, obviously, to Microsoft for hosting us. A fun fact is if you walk outside and you look directly down, you can see the people who made this map. So thanks for that coincidence. Let's see. Thank you all for showing up to hear about this work, and thanks to everyone who tuned in virtually. So with that being said, before we head to our main course for the evening, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So that's me a year ago. I am in the expanded R universe. I'm what you call a social scientist. And I have the paperwork as of a week ago to show for it. So yeah. Thank you. I know this debate kind of comes up in the data science community of like, should I do a PhD? Do you need a PhD to be a data scientist? And kind of my contribution to that debate is, look, a PhD is a lot of this, but it's a lot of that too. So the distribution varies, but just know that if you're thinking about that in your data science journey. My academic research that I did during my PhD primarily was around political communication, so leveraging data science tools, including Texas data, Bayesian modeling, and other things to really study political media ecosystems in the US. As a side note, this is a hill I'm willing to die on. I think political science is the original data science. The word statistics literally means numbers from the state. So just think about that next time an arrogant economist or computer scientist tells you what to do. So yeah, listen to us instead. So that's what I had been doing. This is what I'm doing now. I'm a research scientist at SurveyMonkey. We have a fantastic research insights team at SurveyMonkey. Big shout out and thanks to Laura Ronsky and the other great folks there who've contributed a lot to the work that I'm going to show you shortly. So I work on what I like to call full stack survey research, which involves everything from questionnaire design to sampling, weighting, analysis, and everything else that happens after that. A really exciting part of my job is that we get to work with a lot of these great organizations, including, as you see here, the Harvard Medical School, AAPI Data, JD Power. We have a number of media partnerships as well that have been exciting. Kind of most relevant here to what I'm about to talk about is I'm a creator of the R package, SVMKR. You can download that now if you'd like. Maybe not right this second, but definitely you should do it after the talk. I hope to convince you to do that. And I had the good fortune of co-leading our 2022 pre-election polling partnership with NBC News and the good folks over at UPenn who run the public opinion program. So you'll hear a lot about that in just a second. Last thing, I'm actually formerly a Microsoftie. I don't know if that's like the fun tech industry term for it. I'm sure there's like a better one. But I did work at Microsoft. That's my connection to this hallowed building. I interned at MSR in 2021. I never stepped foot in New York that year, unfortunately. But I worked at the computational social science group, and we're still continuing to work on using data science to understand the role of TV news, TV media in election campaigns. And if we have time, I'll tell you a little bit about that work. Okay, so enough about me. Let's move on to the main course. So this is how the talk's gonna proceed. I want to give you an overview of what election analytics really means. And then I want to dive into mainly this first application here, which is our pre-election polling efforts at SurveyMonkey. And again, if we have time, which I suspect we'll be a little bit short on, I'll tell you a little bit about the work we've been doing at Microsoft on earned TV media. And then we'll have a kind of fun discussion of what the future of all this looks like. OK, so overview of election analytics in brief. I will try. I want to start this section in a maybe unusual way, which is I want to put on my historian hat. I think as data scientists, it's important for us to take stock of where we are, and in order for us to do that, it's really important to take a kind of zoom out and look at how far we've come and see how the tools that we're working with have developed in their long history. And in the case of election analytics, there really is a long history, which really starts with the first election. Well, not really starts at the first election. The first election was really devoid of election analytics. This was actually before the time of political parties, but the election itself was a huge party, right? This guy over here, this is a painting of colonial Virginia. As you can see, this guy's having a lot of fun. He's refilling his bottle on the way to the polls. This was a time when 1% of the population voted, very different time. And so this was a time of booze, bribes, fun theme songs. All the candidates had their fun little kind of theme songs on the campaign trail. Some less savory aspects of how elections were done. A lot of the political party bosses would intimidate voters at the polls, right? So not really resembling the election analytics that we use today for the most part. But the pomp and circumstance of elections, like that still very much is something that I think is carried on to the present day. So if we fast forward about a half century, 1824 is a super important year. It's really the year of the first poll, as we know it in the US. And this was a straw poll that was published by the Harrisburg Pennsylvanian. I lived in Harrisburg for a summer. They don't make these kinds of papers anymore, sadly. They don't do straw polls either. I don't know what's wrong with them. But this straw poll was the first poll as we know it that was circulated publicly in the US. And so these straw polls were like the definition of like what we call convenience samples, right? These were observers, journalists at these papers going out into the street, maybe asking their readers, like, who are you going to vote for in the upcoming election? I'll tell you a fun example of this. There's one paper that used to go out that sent people out on 4th of July to all the local taverns, and they would have them count the toasts that were being made to the political candidates who were on the ticket in the area. So lots of fun analytics being done, but very bad in a lot of ways, which we'll talk about. Perhaps you already know, and whether this was actually informative for voters, it's a little bit hard to tell. Right. Okay. So 1824, a big year. The 1860s to the 1880s, this is kind of the beginning of what we call the progressive era in the US. This is around when the 14th Amendment was passed, so voting rights, African Americans kind of gained voting rights during this period. And really the important thing is that there were a lot of these big voter registration reforms as a result of the progressive era. And the progressive kind of era reformers. And so why does that matter? There's a kind of key part of this reform that's worth noting is that you had to register under a specific political party. And that key thing there is what allowed political parties to actually start tracking and in some cases targeting voters. Before this was kind of an ad hoc thing, these reforms really brought about the first voter files, in my opinion. Obviously, they were very crude, and the way we use voter files today are very different, but this was a big milestone. Okay, so jumping forward again to 1924, this was the year that the first field experiment, really outside of psychology, was run. This was a fairly sophisticated experiment for the time. This was a two-stage block randomized voter registration mailer experiment. So this guy, Harold Gosnell, a very famous social scientist, the treatment group in his experiment got these mailers, these very kind of funny, old-timey postcards that would encourage you to register for the upcoming election. And he found that the treatment group was actually 10% more likely to register for the upcoming election. Kind of huge pivotal finding. It was published in the American Political Science Review, and basically no one ran an experiment again for like several decades. It was something that just didn't take off for whatever reason. So if you're working on something and your coworkers are giving you a hard time and you're not getting the recognition you deserve, just like remember this. Okay, so jumping ahead, 1936 is what I like to call the first 2016 election. This was the year that the Literary Digest, which was actually a famous pollster at the time, in the last, I think, 3 or 4 elections, they were known for super accurately predicting the outcome of each presidential election. And believe it or not, they had these like massive polls that they would run on their readers. Like the one in 1936 had 3 million responses, right? Like that's insane. That's like big data as we know it, understand it today, right? And so they ran their poll in 1936, and it was like massively wrong. It was like super wrong. It predicted that FDR was going to lose terribly. And in fact, FDR like totally swept that election. One man saw it all coming, and his name was George Gallup, and he did a reanalysis of the poll. He actually reran the poll, and he found that the readers of the Literary Digest were like very disproportionately affluent white readers who were disproportionately Al Smith voters. And so this was kind of like the discovery of like non-response bias. And so George Gallup went on to found his own polling firm, and he kind of revolutionized the practice of what we call probability polling, right? Okay, so I'm going to kind of speed things up a little bit here. 1952 is a big year. It's kind of a milestone year for television. The first TV ad is run in a major election, really in any election campaign. That's this ad, Eisenhower Answers America. In academia, this is a really, really big year. This is like kind of the beginning of what we call the behavioral revolution in the social sciences, and that's really born at University of Michigan. University of Michigan starts this really famous survey panel that's called the American National Election Studies panel, and it's the longest running panel on US political attitudes that we have. And you have all these kind of new tools that come to the fore, I think, in this era, right? You have the usage of media market data, TV viewership, audience data, the fields of survey methodology and political behavior sort of come out of this era, and these large-scale survey panels are really kind of starting to become popular. 1960 is a big year. It's the first TV debate. Obviously, we have a lot of wonderful election analytics firms, some of which folks in the audience work at. These firms actually began in this time period here. So one kind of famous example is the Simulmatics Corporation, which is like probably the most like mid-century name for a technology company ever. There's a great book that's called If Then, which I'd recommend if you want to read more about this. But these guys were basically doing the things that we do today back in 1960, including predicting county level election results, simulating the Electoral College. These guys were all doing that. This is what they were doing it on. This was called the People Machine. And so all of this stuff has been going on for a very, very long time. I'm gonna fast forward to 2006. Obviously, a lot of stuff happens between then. Telephone polling becomes kind of a dominant form of polling. Our, kind of like birth of Jesus moment happens in the 90s when R is invented, right? 2006, I think, is a special year. It's the rise of nudges and kind of the behavioral science era. One of the most famous political science papers, I think, ever published, the Gerber and Green 2008, which is basically a replication of what Gosnell did in 1924, finding that not just mailers, but mailers that tell you how your neighbors vote can be effective in getting out the vote. In fact, can be even more effective than what Gosnell found with just kind of normal voter registration mailers. Okay, so 2006, big year. 2008 is perhaps the biggest year in recent decades. It's sort of like the dawn of the big data era. The Obama 08 campaign kind of revolutionized and modernized campaign analytics. A lot of the folks who worked on the campaign, these alumni went on to kind of found and advise a lot of the analytics firms that do great work today. 538 obviously was founded this year, and Nate Silver kind of revolutionized public election forecasts. Public's kind of a, I don't know, iffy word there, but so 2008 is a big year, and I will say that this is kind of like where all of these like tools that people use in the analytics world, micro-targeting, social media mobilization, these like huge voter files that are merged with commercial data and all these other sources, using machine learning to score voters, like all of this stuff I think really comes to a fore in 2008. 2012 to 2016, a lot of stuff happens here. I like to think of these years as the tech elections. I'm gonna once again genuflect to our hosts. This is kind of a historic period because this is the kind of the first time that phone poll responses dip below 10%, like less than 10% of people for telephone polls were picking up the phone and answering. And so Microsoft Research, which perhaps many of you know of this famous paper, showed how to take a really, really unrepresentative sample, not through telephone, but through kind of another very, very popular technology, the Xbox. And they showed how to take users, gamers, like Xbox gamers, and actually turn their responses to things like, who are you going to vote for? How do you feel about the job that Barack Obama is doing? And turn it into a representative poll. using multi-level regression and post-stratification, a technique that has obviously since then become very venerable and well-known in the data science world. Some other stuff happens, right? So non-response bias is kind of like pinned down as the culprit for skewing the 2016 polls. I'll sort of talk about this a little bit, but I'm just going to kind of skip ahead here to present day. So what is going to be the theme of 2024? I think you know the answer, or I think you know the answer, which is, right, the rise of the machines, right? This is what kind of everyone is saying is going to be like the theme of 2024, right? So in a lot of ways, they may not be wrong, right? So kind of for the first time ever, a kind of major political ad is mostly, or as far as I know, entirely generated using generative AI. Presumptive candidates themselves are sharing pictures of themselves generated by these generative AI technologies and so on. And I'll sort of return to this, but there's kind of a question mark here for how this milestone is going to look, but I do think it's going to be a milestone year. Okay, so 10 big milestones in election analytics. A sort of theme here, I think, is as the voter population has expanded in the US, you've seen these kind of technological changes accompany that. So a big one happened with voter registration and kind of voter files with the 14th Amendment. And then you have these other similar kind of advents, the kind of rise of polling in the early 1900s. So that's kind of a theme that I would like to leave you with, like the voting population expanding and technology in some ways is sort of meeting the needs and the demands of reaching those voters. Okay, so putting my historian hat aside, so some recurring themes and characters in this history that I just laid out for you. But let me reorganize it in a sort of easier way. So who's doing this work, right? So we have researchers, practitioners. What are they doing? They're doing all sorts of things, right? Opinion polling, outcome forecasting, message testing, optimizing resources. All of these things are things that we care about when we're doing election analytics. And we do this for a host of reasons, right? Not just working on the campaign trail and improving decision making. A lot of election analytics is done now increasingly by media organizations in order to inform news coverage, right? And so, all of you basically make up the how probably on this slide, but there's all sorts of tools that folks use in this kind of current election analytics landscape. Kind of your mileage may vary, to each their own, but as you can see, it's sort of like a big, diverse election analytics landscape today. Okay, to kind of set the stage a little bit and to kind of tell you like what all these like big brains have come together to actually teach us about elections. I think there's 5 big lessons. So the first one, and it's no coincidence that it's the first one, is that the incumbency advantage, the advantage that incumbent candidates have in an election, is extremely large. And if you had to bet on like one thing for any election, and you didn't know anything about the election ahead of time, like you bet on the incumbent. Like that still explains like something like 70% of election outcomes in the US. The second thing is we kind of like hear a lot about the media and the media's role in politics and society, right? Like the fourth estate, right? But it turns out the effects of media are pretty minimal in politics and certainly in elections. That's sort of this like consensus finding that we've arrived upon in political science. Rather, I think you should think about the media as agenda setting. So there's this kind of famous quote that media may not be successful in telling you how to think, but it's stunningly successful in telling you what to think about, right? Like that's like what agenda setting says. Third, so how people vote is extremely nationalized. It's like extremely kind of tied to their national party affiliations. And there's typically quite low levels of split ticketing where people vote for one party at one level and vote for another party at another level, right? So that being said, party affiliation is still by far, I think, the strongest predictor of attitudes and behavior across kind of election contexts. Number 4, and this is kind of like a big but here, which is that persuasion, like campaigns persuading people to vote one way or another, it still does work. It's not like it doesn't work entirely. It works on the margins. So this is a really famous experiment that was done a couple years ago. This was testing out what we call deep canvassing. The idea being that canvassers going door to door, they're not just telling you, not just asking you how you're going to vote and giving you like a 5-minute spiel about what their candidate or campaign has to offer, but really having like a long, empathetic conversation with the person, kind of meeting them halfway, trying to really understand people that you're trying to persuade, why they believe what they do, and trying to kind of persuade them, I would say, in a more gentle way. This has been shown to be effective, again, in certain contexts and on the margins, and certainly not for everyone. But that being said, persuasion like still does work sometimes. Last thing is, and this is kind of a similar flavor to number 4, is that okay, like incumbency advantage is big, but it turns out in competitive elections, like other things still do matter. Like you can't just be like a terrible candidate in a competitive election and hope to win. Like things like what we call candidate quality still and can do matter. And I'll show you indeed an example of this shortly. Okay, so history and political science lecture part over. You guys are all data scientists. You came here for data science and R, so let's talk about that stuff. So in particular, I want to tell you about, as I said, pre-election polling, and in particular pre-election polling that we did at SurveyMonkey this past midterm election cycle. So we had this partnership with, as I said, these good people at UPenn, the Program on Opinion Research, and with them we basically partner to deliver weekly midterm pre-election polls to NBC News. And in fact, if I remember correctly, we've had this partnership with NBC News for a couple of cycles before this, certainly before 2022, I think even as far back as 2014. And so why we're doing this, it's really like 4 things. One is this is news content, right? Like polls are covered in the news, like it or not. This is data for decision desk analysts, right? Like the folks who work behind the scenes to call races on election night. Like this pre-election polling data is actually really helpful. We created a bunch of public dashboards and banners for you all and for journalists and for other folks in the kind of landscape to consume. And finally, and this is something that not only we're thinking about it, but I think folks in the broader kind of polling space are thinking about, which is how do we move away from the kind of like man on the street exit polling that you hear about and you see on the news, and how do we kind of scale that up, and how do we kind of most importantly drive down the costs of that? And one possibility is to move to an online only exit poll, and this is kind of an opportunity to test that out. Okay, so a few things we learned from our polls. The first thing, kind of most importantly, is that hooray, like our polls were good. This should inspire confidence in polling. Our polls weren't horribly wrong. We characterized most, not just battlegrounds, but most races that we asked about correctly. And so what you're seeing here is the margin between the Democratic and the Republican candidate in the general election for Senate races. And you can see in blue there, that's the actual results. And then orange is what our polls summarize as being the gap in the week before the election, and this is with all the weighting, which I'll tell you about in a second. And you can see that for the most part, we actually, I would say we sort of nailed it. We sort of nailed it. And the same is true for gubernatorial races, excuse me. And so yeah, you can see, I think there's something like 30 races here, and we were pretty dead on for most of them. In fact, all of them. Okay, so yay, we're great. Another kind of important thing, right? Like the thing that you hear about in the postmortem of every election, right? Are like, what were the issues? Like, what were the issues that drove the election? What is this election about? And from our data, from our perspective, this election was, yes, about abortion. Abortion was kind of this big issue that everyone was saying was going to drive people to the polls, Democrats in particular to the polls. Yes, 26% of Democrats said that abortion was like the issue in deciding how they will vote. But climate change was actually also just as important for Democrats and getting Democrats out to the polls. For Republicans, like without a question, inflation was kind of the driving issue in their turnout. Okay. You might ask whether this was the year that, this was kind of be like a record year of like split ticketing and people and moderates kind of developing sophisticated policy preferences. And a year of that, this was not. So, so what I'm showing you here is a crosstab between respondents' House candidate choice and their Senate candidate choice in whatever race that they were eligible to vote in. And you can see here that, for example, 90% of voters who voted for the Democratic Senate candidate voted for the Democratic House candidate, and basically the same for the Republican candidate, right? Like a mere 3 to 5% of voters have kind of like mismatched choices in how they vote. Mismatch is maybe not quite the right word, but they don't. They're not split ticketing, right? They're not pairing a Democrat with a Republican on their ballot. This is just not really a phenomenon that happens in politics today, is what I'm trying to convey to you. That being said, even though split ticketing doesn't happen that often or really at all, we do see small but meaningful split ticketing in certain contexts. In particular, Georgia, if you all remember, was an instance of this particularly low quality Republican candidate running, and you did in fact see, again, a small but like a noticeably larger amount of split ticketing happening in Georgia. So 7% of Kemp voters for the Republican gubernatorial candidate voted for Raphael Warnock, the Democratic Senate candidate, over the shall we say, low-quality Republican candidate, Herschel Walker. That's like 2% more than at the national level, but this can matter in these kinds of competitive races, right? Again, that being said, this wasn't happening everywhere. Split ticketing trends in Pennsylvania were actually kind of surprising. You would think that there was this kind of conversation going on that Dr. Oz was also this low quality candidate. Like he's never really run for office before. Like surely people, even Republicans, will be defecting to vote for John Fetterman on their ticket, and actually the reverse happened, as we saw it from our polls at least. So actually fewer Mastriano voters voted for Fetterman than did Shapiro voters for Oz. And so why this happened, we can kind of talk about that. There were other things going on in that race. John Fetterman notably had a stroke in the months prior to the race. And so I guess the takeaway here is that, yes, candidate quality matters. What candidate quality means to different voters differs, right? It very well could differ. There are other factors here, too. There was a significantly different kind of media strategy on the ground between these candidates. So the story is a little bit incomplete based on our polls alone. But split ticketing, kind of different across contexts. OK. I want to now show you how we actually do these polls. So this is what our polling workflow looks like at a high level. Again, so designing our questions, we do this basically every week, every 2 weeks with all of our stakeholders. We sample, we actually field our survey, and I'll talk about our special sauce there. And then again, we use our beautiful friend R to do all of the work thereafter. So in terms of the scale, so these were daily surveys that we fielded between Biden's inauguration and election day. Altogether, we asked about 200 questions, 200 different questions, not all in one survey. That would be really annoying for anyone taking a survey. But in total, we got about, close to 2 million responses. Still not as many as the Literary Digest got in the 1930s, but close. This was looking at about 2,000 daily responses on average and about 29,000 responses weekly. And again, I'll sort of talk about this, but actually many of the steps that you see here, we were able to actually automate using our beautiful, lovely R package. Okay, we asked all sorts of questions. We asked questions about Biden and Trump. We asked questions about issues, of which you saw some plots. We asked questions about the specific races. And then we asked kind of this standard kind of block of questions about the survey taker, right? So the standard kind of demographic questions that you see. A couple of innovations on what we asked. We wanted to get a better sense of whether there were like professional survey takers out there taking our surveys. Like this was actually like a big issue in previous cycles. So we asked like pretty detailed questions about like how many surveys are you taking? How many surveys did you take before this one today? How many surveys have you been taking this past month? I don't think I'll get into it too much today, but I like to say that our sample, which I'll talk about in a second, I think uniquely was able to capture like less professional survey takers, survey beginners, if you will. And then we asked kind of this like set of questions about their turnout history. This is like really important for identifying who's going to be a likely voter, right? Okay. Now for the kind of special sauce. So we fielded our survey on the SurveyMonkey end page. And so basically imagine every time you took, let's say a Google form, right? You got an invitation to take a political poll. That's basically what the sampling kind of mechanism is for our poll, which is to say an invite on the end page of some percentage of daily SurveyMonkey takers, I think it was about 20%, to take that poll that you just saw. And so the traffic for SurveyMonkey surveys is like several million every day. So even 20% of that traffic turns out to be a pretty large number. And so as statisticians and data scientists and political pundits who will remain unnamed, you might wonder like what's up with this poll, right? Like, is this actually a good poll? Is this any better than like the Harrisburg, Pennsylvanians straw polls, right? Is this a scientific poll? I won't show you what the rest of the thread said, but right, like the question is like, is this like a good poll? Thank you, Chuck Todd, for defending us. Okay, so I wish Chuck Todd had this study that we ran recently, because I think it does demonstrate what our poll does well. And so just a sidebar here about like how to evaluate a poll on its quality, right? So one way that you can do this, and the approach that we took, is take known or high quality population benchmarks that exist out there, right? The unemployment rate, the percentage of driver's license holders in the US, the number of SSI recipients, the marital rate, the divorce rate, right? These are all things that government agencies have like super high quality estimates of, and compare what our survey estimates to those numbers and compare it to like a comparable alternative, right? And so you can see here that our end page actually beats out kind of another potentially high quality panel alternative to our end page. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm kind of going to speed things up a little bit. So in terms of the processing workflow, we use our dear friend Tidyverse. I don't have to teach you all anything about Tidyverse. We have some kind of opinions about how we handle things like item non-response. So for substantive questions, things that we want to actually like report about, we just kind of list-wise delete, which is kind of like a bad assumption in some cases, but this is sort of a standard practice in a lot of polling. For weighting variables, on the other hand, we actually recode these. And we've tried different methods, and like this is fine, basically. Okay, how we weight our polls. So I'm going to kind of speed this up a little bit, but so the target populations that we want to weight to are like some combinations of these here. So adults or likely voters, either nationally or in these battleground states. And we want to have these crosstabs either monthly or weekly, daily, or even at a rolling kind of window, day by day for the last 28 days, right? And so the most important thing in weighting, right, is like what are you weighting to? What is the population that you're targeting? And so we rely on the American Community Survey And so the American Community Survey has really high quality estimates of age, race, gender, crosstabs, as well as education and census division. And we use those marginal distributions. We also use these joint distributions that combine these. And in addition, and this is like a super important thing, we also use the 2020 past vote in every single state as a target distribution. Okay, and so we take these and we just use straightforward raking. Don't attack me for not using MRP. We had reasons for this. If you'll note earlier, I said that we had 200 questions, fitting 200 questions, fitting a model for 200 questions every week. I challenge you all to do that, working on the campaign trail. This turned out to just be the more practical option, and it worked like quite well. Okay, I am going to mostly skip through this. We have a way of kind of predicting who are likely voters. We use this mixed effects model, excuse me. You guys are all sort of like, I would guess, experts in the kind of mixed effects Stan kind of lexicon here. So nothing really controversial that we're doing, but we validated our approach to kind of predicting likely voters, and it works quite well. Okay, so we created a bunch of things from our polls every week, which include, obviously, the raw data, making that available to our partners. They also include a number of dashboards that we outsource to a Tableau developer. You can actually go to our website and look at these even now. We made banners, and this is probably actually the most important output that we made. Like in the polling world, banners are super important. They're kind of like the shareable format or currency of choice. And so we built those using the XPSS and the OpenXLS package. And week to week, we were like kind of constantly comparing our polls to other polls that were out there at the state level, in addition to the 538 kind of state level average. And we did pretty well. We were pretty, I mean, we did pretty well, I will say, with a asterisk there. This like practice of comparing your polls to others is commonly called like poll herding, I guess derisively sometimes called. It's like something you should not like, not like put like a lot of stock in and not use to adjust how you're doing polling, but it is a good kind of reference or benchmark to do, right? And in addition to that, we were trending our questions every week too. And so I'll kind of conclude here with a demonstration of how this entire workflow that I've shown you, a lot of it can be automated using this R package that we're currently developing. And as I said, it's public. A lot of the features are still in development. How much time?
You're good. You got plenty.
Okay.
15 minutes you want?
Okay, cool. All right. Okay. So starting at the design stage, as I mentioned, we write up this questionnaire kind of week to week with our different partners. And that usually looks something like this, right? Like fire up a Google Doc, write up the questions that you want to be asked. And what we have is this markup language that's called QDoc. And really, it's just this syntax to kind of specify exactly what kind of question you're asking, right? If you're asking a single answer question, there's like a tag for single answer. If you're asking, if you want to denote, delineate individual choices, you can do so. There's a choices tag, but there's also a choice tag too to delineate that. If you want to ask a matrix question, there's a tag for that, and so on, right? And they're kind of increasing layers of complexity. So you can specify that this question, for example, is a drop-down, or you can have it, you don't have to specify that, right? So we developed this syntax that actually allowed, that worked very, very nicely with R, right? So the way that our package works is you have a OAuth token from your developer account, and you can actually directly read in that questionnaire into R, and you can directly upload that to SurveyMonkey. No need to manually program your survey. this is that exact survey that I showed you for the questionnaire of in the previous slide. And so there's a kind of manual step here, right, of actually collecting your responses. We think it might be a bad idea to automate this step. Like, it's actually probably really important to have somebody make the exact decisions, the parameters, the choices for the parameters of what panel or what source to field the survey on. So this part is manual as of right now. And so once you're done collecting your responses, you can download your responses. Well, first of all, you can see, in your account, what other surveys you have and identify the one that you want to download your responses from, which is what you're seeing there. We have some pretty neat code that parses these responses quite fast. It can be non-trivial to do that for really large surveys, and I think we are doing a better job of parsing this fast, and you get a nice, beautiful data frame that comes out of that. The next step is weighting, right? And so we actually in the package have a number of different targets that you can choose from. So you're seeing here, this is showing you the different distributions for the US GenPop target that we actually used in our surveys, right? The exact ones that I mentioned before from the ACS, right? You're seeing the distributions for, age by education, by region, right? And so on. And so the next thing in your workflow is to do the weighting, run the weighting, right? So we have this nice little canned weight2 function that you can run, and super simple. It can then rake your weights to that target distribution. And not only that, but it can actually automatically discover the questions that match the regex criteria that we have in the back end to map the questions to the variables in the ACS. So that's what's going on there. That green text is, hey, that's the question that matches to age or education or race in the ACS. Okay, there's a lot of other bells and whistles in this weight2 function here that I'm not going to get into. We're also working on a model_LV function that is taking this a step further and actually generating likely voter probabilities for each respondent in the survey. You can just do that and just call it a day and run that. You can have the function actually cross-validate between a bunch of different models and return to you the scores based on the highest performing model. Our hope is for this to be a pretty canned black box is often said in like a derisive way, but our hope is for this to be like a pretty easy function to run if you're running the same kind of likely voter model week to week. This is meant to kind of ease that workflow, right? You can do, you can estimate your margin of error in your surveys, and lastly, I'm going to talk about the banners that you can make. So assuming that you clean your variables and give them nice names, you can then go ahead and make your banners pretty easily using the make banners function. You specify what variables you want on the rows, which ones you want on the columns. If you have any weights, you can specify what the weights are going to look like. And then you can write your banners, and you can actually upload your banners too. So I'm going to show you actually what that looks like, I think. Maybe. Yes, OK. Yeah, so this is an example of a banner that you can generate pretty much using this workflow. So it's nice and colored, which a lot of banners tend not to be. And you can see here that in this workflow, you can actually generate like lots of banners, for example, for individual states. You'll see here that it says LV. These are banners for likely voters. If you want to generate banners for other populations, you can do that. But this is basically what our workflow looks like using as much R as we can, right? OK. Go download SVMKR. In summary, I just want to talk a little bit about some challenges for polling at SurveyMonkey and kind of thinking beyond 2022. One is, did we all get lucky in 2022? And my answer is yes, yes, we did. That's just the nature of off-cycle midterm year polling. The kind of population of voters that you're not reaching, that tends to be bigger in presidential election years. That's a little smaller in off-cycle years, so that non-response issue is less of an issue. And so you can see here, so 538, this nice little article demonstrating exactly this, that polls were historically accurate in the 2022 midterms. Another question that we're left with and we're working on and we're thinking about is, what is the sampling frame for all of those people who are saying yes to taking a poll from SurveyMonkey at the end of already taking a presumably long, potentially even annoying survey from SurveyMonkey already, right? Who are those people? It seems that those people are not extremely skewed population-wise. We have some other studies that suggest that actually our end page actually captures more Republicans than Democrats. That's kind of unusual. It's usually the other way around. So it doesn't seem like it's a super skewed population, but that's kind of a weird thing to do, right? To ask to take another survey after already having taken a survey. So we have to have a better understanding of this, but of course there's some issues with privacy here that we need to think through. And kind of a third question here is, how can we take our end page and how can we make it better? And how can we make it better using other surveys from other modes or panels or fielding methods? This is a chart from the Pew Research Center that shows that basically the last couple of years have seen an explosion in the number of methods used to field surveys. So it used to be, right, and you don't even have to go as far back as 2000. You could probably go back to 2012, the year of the famous Xbox paper, that most surveys that were done by national pollsters were live phone surveys, random digit dialed survey. That's what RDD over there stands for. And that is very much no longer the case today. In fact, online opt-in surveys like ours are kind of the dominant mode for fielding surveys. This poses a unique set of issues. We need to better understand who's going into what here, who's going into each of these different kinds of surveys, and I think there's a lot of opportunities to do better work here in terms of blending surveys and in terms of bringing in other kind of high quality probability samples that are not these online opt-in surveys. Okay, so I definitely don't think we have time to get into this other work that I've done, so let me skip ahead to the future. Okay, I want to leave you with three emerging trends, or what I think are emerging trends in election analytics. The first is the generative AI revolution, and kind of a big question mark here. So as I said, this is already being used. In fact, this is already being used to generate fundraising emails that you may have already seen. There is work showing that there is potential for chatbots to actually simulate the kind of deep canvassing that I was telling you about. People have figured out ways to actually embed these ChatGPT-like chatbots into surveys so that they can dynamically update what you're seeing on the next page of your survey. And it tends to, and there's some early evidence suggesting that it comes up with more persuasive messages if messages are going to be delivered to you in a survey than a human could probably come up with ex ante. So something to keep an eye on. I think we're going to see the scope of analytics, like the kinds of issues and groups and voters that we care about with our analytics, expand. For example, I think AAPI voters are going to be sort of a big voter block that's going to be of kind of increasing interest. There's a lot of fundraising and money being mobilized to kind of better deliver analytics to understand AAPI voters. They're kind of an interesting interesting trends emerging in that voter block. Turnout is up by 20% amongst Asian American voters from 2020. This is kind of a demographic group that I think pollsters and campaign professionals are and should care more about. The third thing is that I think we're going to start seeing more and better analytics at the local and state levels. I don't have exact numbers for this, but certainly for certain state and local races, there's more money being raised and being pumped into from outside sources than I think have ever been. This sort of like nationalization and this kind of calcification of partisan identity is less so down ballot, and I think there's more opportunity there to shape issues and shape the vote in a way that you really can't for the top of the ticket choice that voters are making. And I think Republicans are paying attention to this. I'm not so sure about Democrats, so it seems to be an asymmetric trend at the moment, but we will see. And lastly, there's just more data about you, like all of your behaviors at the local level. In fact, this is for another day, another talk, or maybe at beers afterwards, but I'm actually working on a separate database that's called Local View that actually looks at who participates in local meetings using YouTube videos. There's all of these meetings are being posted on YouTube. If you spoke at a local government meeting, I have you on my laptop. So keep that in mind. That being said, that's all I got. So let's keep the conversation going. Obviously, I welcome questions, but if you want to get in touch, here's how you can get in touch with me. Okay, I will stop there.
In the room, questions start. All right, I saw your hand first, and I'll come back to you.
With respect to using this big data, did you use anything other than just plain old tidyverse to get faster data analysis? And when you talk about weighting, is that analogous to the resampling we do in machine learning applications to make sure that our training and test sets are balanced?
Yeah, so
repeat the question.
So the two questions were, first, besides tidyverse, like what else are we leveraging, either in the R ecosystem or elsewhere, to do what we do? And so I'll answer that one first. So yes, tidyverse is super helpful. In terms of refactoring code, there are limits to that. Besides, there are package level limits to that. At a certain level, you have to write efficient code that's like language agnostic, and we've certainly had to do a lot of that, particularly in parsing questions and literally thinking about like big O notation and making sure that we're optimizing our loops. So actually, most of the gains have come not from like switching from base R to tidyverse, but actually like peeling back tidyverse and thinking about how we're writing our code and writing it more efficiently. The second question was about weighting. And so I think this analogy to resampling training or testing data to, for example, generate more similar distributions between your training and testing set, I think that's actually a good analogy for what weighting is doing. So the testing set here you could think of as the target population, right? The population of likely voters or all US adults. And the training set you might think of as your survey, or perhaps your, so I should say that we're actually, when we generate our likely voter scores, we actually use a data set with a ground truth where we know who turned out and who didn't. But yeah, so that being said, you could definitely think of that analogy as working, as operating how we weight. That's right. Yeah.
You had the chart from Pew Research about the trends and how common each of the polling methods are. And right now, phone polling is disappearing, and often surveys are becoming the most common. What kind of analytics would there be in terms of which methods are the most effective polling methods for getting accurate results?
Yeah, so the question was in reference to this chart here, which is this kind of explosion of different polling methods, and whether there are tools out there to help us think about which to choose, if I kind of understood your question correctly, or how to kind of dynamically combine these different kinds of methods. And I think my answer is kind of inherent in how I described your question back to you. I think that we are starting to think about, for example, using these tools in reinforcement learning to think about how we might dynamically allocate resources across, say, different polling methods. I think the trick here is that At SurveyMonkey, for example, we really only have access to one method that is online opt-in, polls. We do have access to like different kinds of online opt-in polls. Like we do have access to panels. So there is some thinking about how we could say dynamically over time as we're fielding a survey, field respondents across these sources. I think the bottleneck there is that once you start moving into these other types of polls, live phone for certainly, but any sort of probability-based poll, they're just resource constraints. They're just like literally monetary constraints in making that happen. So to the extent that you can overcome that, I think that we're going to see a lot more of that in the future.
Hi, I was wondering, when you're tracking your poll versus the other polls in 538, in the last election, you tended to be with the other polls and they were reasonably accurate, but what would you do if your poll happened to be different? Like, how would you tell if, like, your polls, maybe your weighting methodology is capturing something that's actually real that the other polls aren't, versus maybe something the other polls are right for, and yours is kind of an outlier?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So the question is, it's about this plot here on the upper right, which is this thing we did, I mentioned, is comparing what our polls were saying, how our polls were characterizing these various races versus how, let's say, the 538 average of all high quality polls were saying for that week. And the question is sort of like, once we look at this, like, what do we do if we're like within the herd, so to speak, and what do we do when we're outside of the herd? Like, how do we adjust our behavior? And this is kind of a complicated question, right? So if you're in the herd, does that mean that you're better? Like, that's not quite the takeaway, right? And so I honestly don't know how to answer that question because, I mean, it didn't happen this cycle, right? Like we were all sort of saying the same thing for all these elections. I will say, though, that if we did find that our polls were outside of the herd, I think it's not clear what we would do, right? Like besides the menu of like weighting options that we have, which I don't think it makes sense to choose a different weighting option to be within the herd. I think maybe if you were a very dishonest pollster, you might choose to do that, but it's not totally clear what you would do if you were outside of the herd. There was this experiment done by the New York Times where they asked a bunch of experts to weight the same survey a bunch of different ways, and all of them came up with different answers to the extent that it characterized like the race that they were trying to characterize like differently. So they came upon different results. So, but it's not clear to me which weighting method you pick to get a certain kind of result. Like, I think that's not super clear, but maybe we'll cross that bridge someday. Hopefully not.
Thanks. Follow-up question on weighting. At what level are you doing this? Is it county level, state level, national, something else since tracked?
Yeah.
Repeat the question.
The question was, what level are we weighting our polls? County level, state level, something else? We, as you can see here, we mostly did nationally and at the state level. We experimented a little bit with county level. I believe at one point, that's when you kind of have to, you got to start drinking the MRP Kool-Aid a little bit. And for the 200 questions, like that just didn't seem practical for us. But we did try that at one point. It just for the purposes of our work, that just didn't make sense.
There's a question on YouTube. Let me ask that, then I will come back to you. And because am I mic'd? Yeah, I am. So this way you don't have to repeat this one. Sorry if I lost this information, but I would like to know why SurveyMonkey would be interested in election analytics, and are they only interested in US elections?
So I don't have to repeat the question. I think our interest in election analytics is demonstrating first of all, what our amazing, great software can do, that it can be used for things like polling attitudes about elections, in addition to a variety of other use cases. And that's really what our research team does, right? Like we take our expertise in survey methodology, social science, and by the way, not just social science, a whole host of other things. And our job is to demonstrate how SurveyMonkey can be used to do excellent research, right? Like that, at the end of the day, that's like kind of what we do. And election analytics is just one small part of what we do. All year round, certainly all presidential election cycle round. I think we are interested in studying elections and politics elsewhere outside of the US. In fact, we have a very kind of global, audience of SurveyMonkey respondents, and that's kind of unique in this space. So I think that is something that we're excited about thinking about. I guess the right opportunity hasn't quite come around for that, but we are thinking about it.
I'm curious about the poll itself. Do you think of it almost like a living document that you're changing to get your outcome a little closer? Do you know what I mean? Like, is the reason that all the polls are kind of around the same zone because they've kind of just iterated to the point where they're correct now, or is it more of a ambiguous, a sort of a ebb and flow on what the questions even are that you're asking?
So, do I have to? Okay.
Yeah.
So the question was, how do we think about our polls? Do we think about it as a living document? Do we think about it as the static snapshot, like a one-shot thing that we deliver at the end, right before election day? And how do we think about it? Because as you pointed out, the questions change from week to week. So a couple of things there. So the questions change week to week because the election's changing week to week, right? Like things that are happening in the country, the world, the elections that our respondents are participating in, things are changing. The Dobbs decision, we couldn't have known that it was going to happen that exact week that it did. Various other events, you can talk about like mass shootings, these other events that we know can influence political attitudes, although I think we show that they largely didn't. We have to be kind of flexible, and we have to be open to the possibility of what's called pulse polling, right? Like be responsive to these events and ask about them. Not to say that all goes into what, the outputs that we produce week to week, right? These guys. But I think it's helpful for us internally to understand what's going on. I think the living document metaphor is a good one. I think really like public opinion and surveys, like the goal is to like take a thermometer reading of the electorate, right? Like that's what all the great public opinion pollsters of yesteryear, like the George Gallup types, like that's like how they envision public opinion polling. So in that sense, I think yes, it's sort of like this like living document of the electorate or whatever other population you're studying.
The page that you've come from in terms of the end page, do you capture that? Do you know where the respondent has come from? And is there any like information from what they've taken before that feeds in, that you can feed into this?
Yeah, so the question is, let me actually go to the relevant slide here because I think this is instructive. So the question is, do we know who's coming from where when they see this page? And when they not only see this page, but they actually click on the Take the Survey button, do we know what survey they're coming from? So the answer is, and I should have really consulted legal before coming to this talk, is I think yes. The issue is two-part. One is that we have this like huge data lake where all of that stuff is stored in a difficult to access way. But really the bigger issue is an issue of privacy and ownership. So those responses are technically owned by the clients who collected them on whatever SurveyMonkey survey these guys came from. So I think there's an issue of ownership there, and I think there's also an issue of privacy, that these respondents are actually not consenting necessarily to have their responses to their previous survey be used by the research insights team. So let me actually show you the header that we show. I believe there's some language either in this header, I'm trying to speed read it now, or actually in our privacy policy itself that makes that clear. So I think there's some issues there in terms of connecting the dots.
I mean, would you consider that like a source of being able to like tie back probability and?
Well, it could be anchoring, right? Because of whatever questions were in the SurveyMonkey survey before. Do you hate puppies? Happens to be one of the questions, and that might condition their answers on that.
Right. Right. So this is a really good point that we don't. So we may want to know where they're coming from for explicitly for record linking. We also may want to know explicitly for measuring how biased their responses might be in our survey. If they're primed, or as you mentioned, they might be anchoring their responses to some stimuli they received in the previous survey. So I agree. I think these are things that we need to be finding out, but we just have to do it in a way that's both efficient from our infrastructure perspective and also respects their privacy. So I think one solution is that we just we have a longer privacy policy. That's one solution.
Okay, was your multi-level model LME4 or was it STAN? Or STAN ARM, I should say.
So the question being, was our multi-level model LME4 or STAN? Let me actually show you the answer. I hope I don't offend one half of the room, but I probably will. Leaving you all in suspense here. Which slide?
It was a simple average.
Yeah, it was just a simple average. No partial pooling. No, it's not that one. This one. Yeah, so we used, neither we used BRMS. We actually started with LME4, but then we used BRMS. I like BRMS. I also like LME, and I also like STAN. So I'll leave it there.
Cool. Let me see if there's any other online ones. If there's any other in-person ones, we'll do the giveaways, and we'll come back to this. When is the SurveyMonkey R package going to be on CRAN?
That is a good question. So when is the SurveyMonkey package going to be on CRAN? At some point. At some point when it's not annoying to submit it to CRAN, I guess is the real answer. So
Never.
Yeah, maybe someday.
Yeah. Okay.
No, this is just, so is the package on GitHub then, if you don't want to deal with CRAN yet, or is it still?
Yes, it is. It is on GitHub. Let me show you the literally glowing URL to the GitHub page, which is somewhere, I believe it is here.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
We tried writing a package for SurveyMonkey. We called it Rhesus. It was a Rhesus monkey.
Oh.
Yep.
Nice.
But we never finished it, so I'm glad
Yeah.
you did. Anyone else? Then while you're here, you mentioned the Xbox paper. A number of the authors are members of the meetup and have either spoken at the meetup or at the conference or are going to soon. Andrew Gilliman, Mike Malecki, a bunch of them are speaking there. So folks, come by. Members of this community were in that paper, that landmark paper. All right, last chance, virtual and in person. All right, if that is the case, let's see a big round of applause. All right, everyone, before we head out, remember July 6th, that will be announced shortly. After that, we have August, a speaker schedule, but no venue. So if you have space, let us know. If you want to speak, let us know. If you're not in New York City, but we're going to have a virtual month one time, let us know if you want to speak. New York Art Conference next month, July 11th through 14th. We're super excited about that. It's going to be a really fun time. And we have the R.Gov conference, and David Shore should be most likely speaking. Someone of those Obama alumni you mentioned.
I know that guy.
Yeah, you know that guy? Yep, maybe you'll come down and we could do like dueling talks, you and him.
Ooh.
I love this. We'll give you both pianos or banjos. We'll give you banjos, and you can fight each other.
Drum them off.
Yeah. All right, with that, thank you everyone for tuning in virtually. Thank you everyone for being here. See you all in July. Thank you for coming.